This YouTube channel is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content shared on this channel reflects the creator's personal journey of learning about U.S. laws, the Constitution, and related topics. The information presented should not be considered legal advice, nor does it substitute professional legal counsel. While every effort is made to ensure accuracy, laws and legal interpretations may change over time. Viewers are encouraged to conduct their own research and consult a qualified attorney for specific legal concerns. The opinions expressed on this channel are those of the creator and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization or institution. By watching and engaging with this content, you acknowledge that value freedom is for educational discussion and exploration, and you assume full responsibility for any actions taken based on the information provided.
What is the First Amendment? Ratified in 1791, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution protects freedoms related to speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petitioning the government. It can be invoked in situations where 1. Freedom of speech protects individuals from government restrictions on speech, including political opinions, protests, and symbolic speech, like flag burning. However, it does not protect speech that incites violence, constitutes true threats, or involves defamation. 2. Freedom of the press prevents government censorship of news media, allowing journalists to report freely without government interference. 3. Freedom of religion prohibits the government from establishing a religion or restricting religious practices. 4. Freedom of assembly allows people to gather peacefully for protests, demonstrations, or meetings. 5. Right to petition the government grants individuals the right to challenge government actions or policies through petitions, lawsuits, or lobbying. 6. Limits and exceptions. The First Amendment only applies to government actions, meaning private companies, like social media platforms, can impose their own rules. It also does not protect speech that leads to imminent harm. Examples include inciting violence or panic, obscenity, or defamation. What are examples of when freedom of speech is threatened? Freedom of speech can be threatened in various ways, both by governments and private entities. Here are some key examples: government censorship and crackdowns. 1. Internet censorship. A government can heavily censor online speech, block foreign media, and punish dissenters. 2. The 1798 Sedition Act criminalized criticism of the government. Similar wartime acts have suppressed speech in the past. 3. Suppression of journalists. Imprisonment of journalists. Outside of the United States, journalists are jailed for reporting the truth or criticizing their country's government. 4. Social media censorship and deplatforming. Bans on political figures and activists. Social media companies sometimes suspend or ban users for controversial speech, raising debates about whether tech companies have too much control over public discourse. Government pressure on platforms. Some governments pressure social media companies to remove certain content, which can be a form of indirect censorship. 6. Cancel culture and social pressure. Public backlash, leading to job loss. Some people face professional consequences for expressing unpopular or controversial opinions, even if their speech is legal. 7. Book bans and content restrictions. Schools and libraries sometimes face pressure to ban books or educational materials that cover sensitive topics. 8. Laws and regulations limiting speech. Hate speech laws. While meant to prevent harm, some argue these laws can be used to suppress political speech. 9. National security laws. Some governments will silence pro-democracy activists and criminalize dissent. What are examples of abuse of power by using freedom of speech? Freedom of speech is a fundamental right, but its misuse can lead to significant harm. Here are documented instances where this right has been abused, along with authenticated sources detailing these events. 1. Spreading misinformation and disinformation, health misinformation, During the COVID-19 pandemic, false claims about vaccines and treatments proliferated online, leading to vaccine hesitancy and undermining public health efforts. 2. Election misinformation. In the 2020 U.S. presidential election, widespread dissemination of unfounded claims about voter fraud eroded public trust in the electoral process. 3. Incitement to violence. January 6th, Capitol riot, Washington, D.C., January 6, 2021. Speeches and online rhetoric alleging a stolen election incited a mob to storm the U.S. Capitol, resulting in deaths and numerous injuries. 4. Harassment and threats online. Harassment campaigns. Individuals, particularly women and minorities, have been targets of coordinated online attacks, including threats and doxing, leading to severe emotional distress and safety concerns. 5. Defamation and slander. Celebrity defamation cases. Public figures have faced false accusations that damage their reputations and careers, leading to legal battles to restore their names. 6. Propaganda and manipulation. The use of state-controlled media to disseminate false information, suppress dissent, and maintain power. 7. Shielding harmful organizations. Groups promoting radical ideologies have exploited free speech protections to spread their messages and recruit members, leading to increased domestic terrorism threats. 8. Weaponizing free speech to silence others. Strategic lawsuits against public participation, or SLAPs. Corporations and individuals have filed baseless lawsuits to intimidate and silence critics. For instance, in February 2025, Greenpeace International sued U.S. energy company Energy Transfer in a Dutch court, alleging the company used meritless legal actions to financially cripple the organization due to its protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. These examples illustrate that while freedom of speech is essential, its abuse can lead to significant societal harm. Balancing this right with the need to prevent misuse remains a complex and ongoing challenge. What are some ways police officers or security officers violate the freedom of speech? Police and security officers violate freedom of speech in various ways, particularly when they use their authority to suppress dissent, silence criticism, or prevent lawful expression. Here are some documented examples of such violations. During the George Floyd protests in the United States in 2020, numerous reports of police arresting peaceful protesters, journalists, and activists without cause, violating their First Amendment rights. During the Occupy Wall Street protest in New York in 2011, police forcibly removed protesters from Zuccotti Park, restricting their right to assemble and express grievances. Using excessive force against protesters. Black Lives Matter protests, United States 2020, officers used tear gas, rubber bullets, and violent tactics against peaceful demonstrators and journalists. Standing Rock protests, North Dakota 2016, law enforcement used water cannons in freezing temperatures against Native American activists protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. Retaliation against critics and whistleblowers, arresting citizens for filming police, despite court rulings affirming the right to record public officials. Citizens have been arrested for filming police misconduct. Threats against whistleblower. Officers who expose corruption within police departments often face retaliation, including demotions or firings. Restricting press freedom. Journalists arrested or harassed. In 2020, CNN reporter Omar Jimenez was arrested live on air while covering protests in Minneapolis. Police have seized cameras and equipment from journalists covering protests or controversial incidents. Enforcing unconstitutional laws or policies. Anti-panhandling laws. Some local ordinances criminalize panhandling, which courts have ruled violates free speech rights. Protest buffer zones. Some cities have imposed restrictive protest zones, making it difficult for demonstrators to be heard. Misusing disorderly conduct or obstruction charges. Silencing public comment at meetings. People speaking out at town halls or public meetings have been removed or arrested for minor disruptions. Targeting activists. Law enforcement has used vague charges to detain activists, discouraging further protest. colluding with private security to suppress speech, pipeline protests, Standing Rock 2016, private security firms and police worked together to surveil and disrupt protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. These actions undermine constitutional protections and can discourage people from exercising their right to free speech. What are some examples of a police officer blatantly ignoring and unconstitutionally denying me the right to my freedom of speech? Note that while these examples have been widely reported by reputable news outlets and civil rights organizations, the specifics can vary by case and jurisdiction. Arresting journalists for recording police actions. Example, in May 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, CNN reporter Omar Jimenez was detained while live streaming coverage of protests. Although laws protect the right to record public officials in public spaces, the incident raised concerns about suppressing free press and free speech. Source: coverage by major networks and local news, as well as commentary from press freedom advocates. 2. Using vague charges to silence peaceful protesters. During the George Floyd protests in 2020, in cities including Seattle, Chicago, and others, numerous peaceful demonstrators were arrested on charges such as disorderly conduct or obstructing a roadway after speaking out or attempting to peacefully protest. These charges were often seen by civil rights groups as pretexts to limit the constitutional right to free expression. Source: reports from the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, and national news outlets like CNN and The New York Times documented multiple incidents. 3. Physically preventing speakers from speaking at public gatherings. There have been recorded instances in various U.S. cities where police have intervened during rallies or public meetings by using physical force to remove individuals from podiums or preventing them from addressing crowds. For instance, during some protests in Washington, D.C. in 2020, officers were filmed pushing speakers away from makeshift stages, effectively silencing their political message. Source: video evidence shared on social media and verified by local news coverage has highlighted such confrontations. 4. Detaining individuals for criticizing police in real time. In several cases across the United States over the past decade, individuals have reported being stopped and questioned by officers for voicing criticism or asking questions during encounters with law enforcement, even when done in a public setting. Such encounters, often documented by civil rights organizations like the ACLU, are seen as efforts to chill free speech. Source: ACLU reports and local investigative journalism have brought attention to these incidents. What is the difference between freedom of speech and freedom of expression? The terms freedom of speech and freedom of expression are very closely related and are often used interchangeably in everyday conversation. However, there is a subtle difference between them. Freedom of speech. This typically refers to the right to verbal or written communication, that is, the use of words, whether spoken or in writing, to express ideas or opinions without government interference. Freedom of expression. This is a broader concept that not only covers speech, but also encompasses all other forms of communication. It includes symbolic acts, such as protests, art, or even flag burning, visual expressions, music, and other nonverbal means of conveying ideas and emotions. In essence, freedom of speech can be seen as a key component of the broader freedom of expression. Legal and philosophical discussions, such as those detailed in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, recognize that while the core idea is similar, expression captures the full range of ways people communicate beyond just spoken or written words. For instance, the SEP entry on free speech explains that although free speech and free expression are often treated as synonymous, the latter is used to cover a wider variety of expressive activities. Likewise, Wikipedia's coverage notes that freedom of expression includes methods like art, symbolic actions, and other forms of conduct that convey meaning. Thus, while in everyday terms they may seem identical, legally and conceptually, freedom of expression is a broader protection that subsumes freedom of speech. How can the First Amendment be used against tyranny? The First Amendment is one of the strongest safeguards against tyranny because it protects the people's ability to speak out, organize, and challenge government overreach. Here's how it can be used to resist tyranny. Speaking out against the government, freedom of speech. Citizens can criticize government policies, leaders, and corruption without fear of punishment. Whistleblowers and activists can expose government abuses. Political opposition and alternative viewpoints can thrive. Exposing corruption and injustice, freedom of the press. Journalists can investigate and report on government misconduct. Independent media can counter propaganda and misinformation. The public can stay informed and hold leaders accountable. Organizing protests and movements, freedom of assembly. People can gather in peaceful protests to demand change. Social movements, like civil rights or anti-war protests, can pressure the government. Public demonstrations can make government abuses visible and harder to ignore. Challenging unjust policies, right to petition the government. Citizens can formally demand changes in laws and policies. Lawsuits can challenge unconstitutional government actions. Grassroots movements can lobby for reforms. Protecting religious freedom, freedom of religion, prevents the government from imposing a state religion or restricting personal beliefs. Ensures that religious groups can organize and advocate for social justice. Historical examples: Civil Rights Movement, 1960s, used free speech, protests, and media to fight racial segregation. Pentagon Papers case, 1971, protected the press from government censorship when exposing Vietnam War secrets. Anti-war protests, various years. Demonstrations helped shift public opinion on wars like Vietnam and Iraq. Why it matters without the First Amendment: a government could silence critics, control the media, ban protests, and suppress opposition. Key steps toward tyranny. By protecting free expression, it ensures that the people, not just those in power, have a voice.